Hello and welcome to the Sitecore Pittsburgh.NET user group. So Pittsburgh.NET user group is part of the .NET Foundation. As many of you know, it's part of a group of meetups that are supported by the .NET Foundation, and they do have a lot of open source project. And if you'd like to join our group, please visit the following URLs here or scan that QR code. Today we are going to Today we're going to look into Bicep deployment stacks, Azure atomic resources, and as speaker we do have Josh. He has presented in the past related to ARM templates in our group. We are delighted to have you, Josh, here, and then he's going to talk more about the foundation, how quickly do it with a live demo as well. Okay, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So we'll be able to answer them. You don't have to wait all the way till the end. You could do anytime you have questions. Josh, welcome to the group. And probably I'll add you to the...
Hey, Bala, thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Alrighty, I can see my screen is shared, so we can go ahead and get started. Like you said, my name is Joshua Donovan. I am a Microsoft Support Escalation Engineer. I work in the Azure Rapid Response team, specifically in the Developer Azure Services organization. I am specialized in the Azure Resource Manager space, or ARM, so that has to do with basically everything like to do with deployments. That would be through Bicep, ARM templates, or even Terraform. I also deal with a lot of resource management and all of the underlying Azure REST APIs that you interact with on a day-to-day whenever you've got any resources in Azure. Finally, the last kind of thing I do has to do with Azure policy and Azure governance. So that's kind of the rundown of what I support on a day-to-day. But today we are going to dig into Azure deployment stacks. So this is a newer concept inside of Azure. It was actually still in preview when I was talking to Bala about it originally, but it has gone GA. So Azure deployment stacks are GA and available for use. And we're going to dive into kind of a quick overview of what they are, how they work, and we're going to get to the demo as fast as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. So what are deployment stacks and why would we use them? So we have deployment stacks are a collection of your Azure resources. You want to keep your deployment stacks to resources that have a similar life cycle. So let's say you are deploying an application that has a variety of different resources, but they're all part of that one deployment. Let's say your production deployment for your application. So they're going to have a similar life cycle of needing to be created at the same time and needing to be deleted at the same time. You wouldn't want to have a deployment stack with resources that have different life cycles, because then they wouldn't be all managed as, you know, that atomic unit. It's kind of turning a bunch of resources into one resource that you manage is kind of the goal here. One of the major things, other than just putting all of your resources into one collection, is you can now control changes and deletions through deny RBAC permissions. So even if you have, let's say, an administrator that has contributor access at a higher scope than what you're deploying to, you can say, no, you can't modify my resource, or no, you're not allowed to delete my resource, even if they otherwise would have permissions. That's kind of a really powerful feature of deployment stacks. You can even get more granular than that, and we're going to dive into that in the demo. But overall, you can basically say my resources are read-only, and even if you have full contributor access, I don't care. I don't want you deleting my resources. Another thing that comes along with it is you can easily track, and then when you want to delete your resources, you can clean them all up. So a deployment stack can be deployed at several different scopes, but basically you're not tied to the concept of a single resource group. Like if you were to deploy your application to a single resource group today, and you weren't using deployment stacks, you could easily clean that up just by deleting the resource group. But what if you have resources that are spread across 50 different resource groups? And maybe there's other resources in those resource groups that don't have to do with your application. Well, when you delete your deployment stack, it can go in and specifically clean up those resources without having to delete that entire resource group and not mess with those other resources. So it really adds a little bit of a, reaching back to that collection of the resources that have the same life cycle without having to result or rely on organizing all of your resources into specific resource groups that are part of that life cycle. The most exciting part of deployment stacks, in my opinion, other than the deletion permissions that you can do, is that you don't have to change your Bicep ARM templates or template specs if you're already using them. If you already have deployment pipelines that you're using, they can stay the same. The only thing that really changes on deployment stacks is the command you use to deploy them. As far as the actual templates that you may already have existing in your environment to deploy your resources, those don't change at all. You basically just change how you're deploying those templates, not the contents of those templates. So as we're talking about how to deploy these deployment stacks, there are two main ways to deploy deployment stacks right now. One of them is through the AZ PowerShell module. There's a new commandlet that's been added that takes what we may be used to, that new AZ resource group deployment, and adds stack on the end. So it makes it to where you can, tab complete it. If you remember that you always use AZ resource group deployment, you can just tab complete to get that stack portion and then pass your template file in, and it is a stack at that point. There are a couple additional parameters that we can see both for the PowerShell module and for the CLI. For one, if you're doing the normal deployment, name is not required. So if you're doing a normal deployment, name can be auto-generated because that deployment reference, that deployment object in Azure is pretty ephemeral. Like it doesn't matter if it gets deleted in the future. If you go into a deployment through the portal and you delete it, it's not going to delete those resources. Whereas with deployment stacks, it's kind of more around for the entire existence of your deployment. So it helps manage those resources. So you need to name it in a way that makes sense, because it isn't just something we can throw away like we may be used to with other deployments. The other couple of things is action on unmanaged. So when we go to delete anything inside of a deployment stack, it's actually an unmanaged action. So you can decide when you delete something to have it just be detached, meaning it exists in Azure still, but it's no longer being managed by that deployment stack. You also have the option to, when you delete and or unmanage, to actually clean up those resources and delete them, that's what we're going to show in the demo here in a minute. You also have your deny settings mode. So this is where you can set essentially either deny deletion or deny, make it read only. And then you also have none. So the examples here both have none. So when you use none, your resources are still managed by the deployment stack, but anybody with the proper permissions can go in and treat that resource as if it were any other resource in Azure. They can delete it, they can update it, whatever they want, because it's not being denied unless you set that deny settings mode. So that's kind of an overview. You can see here that the PowerShell and CLI are very similar in their use cases. In the CLI, if you're used to using that, you would typically do AZ deployment group create, whereas with the stack, you just change the one word, and it's AZ stack group create for a resource group level deployment. There is no way to deploy deployment stacks through the portal right now. So that's not an option, but there are some cool things you can do with the portal after it's been deployed. You can view all of the properties of it, and there's actually a delete button in there now. So you can delete it out of the Azure portal, but you can't actually deploy it out of the Azure portal. So the last slide before we get in the demo, because I really think the proof is in just jumping in and showing, is deployment stacks and scope. So scope is really important when it comes to deployment stacks, because the stack has to be at a parent scope of everything that it's managing. So you can deploy a deployment stack to a resource group level, but if you do that, only the resources inside that resource group will be managed by the stack. What does that mean? That means if you've got a restriction on deletion, somebody can't go into that resource group and delete, let's say, your virtual machine, but they could go ahead and just delete the whole resource group. So because the stack was deployed at the resource group level, it can't enforce at the resource group level. It can only enforce at the child level. So let's say you deploy to the subscription level. Well, then you can enforce all of the deny rules you want on anything that is deployed. So if you deploy to a subscription level, let's say you deploy a resource group and then resources inside of it, well, then you can enforce that deletion rule on that resource group and the resources inside of it. So somebody can't just go out and delete that resource group. Now, at that point, you have the issue of, well, if they want to get rid of those resources, they can just delete the subscription, but that's a little bit more of a higher barrier to entry than just deleting a resource group. You can also deploy stacks at the management group level. This becomes really powerful if you have very large applications that may need to span multiple subscriptions. You can have a stack manage across multiple subscriptions as long as those subscriptions are child or children of the management group that you deploy your stack to. So if you deploy to a management group and there's a couple management groups inside of there, as long as all of the subscriptions that you are wanting to manage, all of the resources that you're wanting to manage, or within subscriptions that are underneath that management group that you deploy your stack to, then it can manage all of it. Really powerful part of that is if you go to delete, it can go in and delete everything from multiple subscriptions, which is it's kind of cool. It cannot, as you can see in the big caution symbol, one thing that you can run into if you're doing multiple subscriptions or if your template already does a cross subscription deployment. If you deploy with deployment stacks, let's say to subscription A, and you then your template already does a cross subscription deployment to, let's say, subscription B, because your deployment stack is deployed to subscription A, it will still deploy that resource, but it won't be able to manage it in subscription B because it's not within scope anymore. That subscription B is not within scope if we deploy our stack to subscription A. Now, if subscription A and subscription B were both inside of a management group and we deployed to that managed group scope, then yeah, we could manage both. So just something to keep an eye out for. But like I said, I wanted to jump into the demo as quick as possible because that's really where things start getting fun. So let me get that pulled up real quick. All right, so here's our demo screen. We're going to be doing most things through VS Code and then the portal itself. Just kind of a quick rundown of the way I have this set up. We have our demo account here in the Azure portal. And then we have my local deployments. So this is going to be what we're going to be making the deployments. This is going to act as if it were your pipeline or if you, the developer, were deploying your application as a stack, it's going to be in this local deployments. We then have our bad actor. I'm going to have play the person trying to mess with our resources. They're going to be on this red one, which is just an administrator console. And that one is going to be making administrative commands. It's actually running on a virtual machine inside of this resource group here. And it has contributor access through a managed identity at the subscription scope. So essentially, they are an administrator because they have contributor access. They should be able to manage all the resources. But we'll dive into that a little bit here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and kick off the first virtual machine. We're going to we'll look at the Bicep here in a second while this is deploying. We're going to do a resource group deployment. Didn't mean to do that. We're going to do a resource group deployment. So we're going to go ahead and make our resource group that we're deploying to, except for that is in the wrong one because I still have the administrator console selected. So let me clear that out. Don't want to get all confused. Okay, so we're on our deployments. Now I'm going to create that resource group. So we're just creating a resource group called regular deployments so that it's easy to see over here. And then we're going to go ahead and kick off our Bicep deployment, and we'll take a look at that Bicep file as this is deploying. So this is a normal deployment. As you can see, AZ deployment group create. So we're not doing anything with stacks here. We're just deploying normally as a deployment. we go look at this main Bicep that we're deploying, we can see, might need to make it a little bigger. Let me scoot this over and then it's a little bigger. So this is essentially a copy paste of the example of how to deploy virtual machines from learn.microsoft.com using Bicep. This is nothing special, but I do have a link to where you can see all of the files here if you are interested in reproducing this demo. But when we look at this, it basically is taking in some parameters for admin username, admin password. I put this in there. Don't use that in production, but basically it's just generating a new GUID as the password. I don't have a concern of accessing this virtual machine or these two virtual machines. So that's why I'm doing it. I would have no idea what the password is though. But basically it grabs in all of the parameters and these are all just the defaults. And then it is deploying a storage account. The storage account is being used for the login or the boot logs, sorry. Then we have a network security group being deployed that's required for the subnet and the virtual machines. And then we have a virtual network being deployed so that we have somewhere to put the virtual machines on the network. We have public IP addresses being deployed. I'm deploying 2 different virtual machines, and I decided to have them separated out so it's easy to see that. If you were doing this in production, you'd of course do like some sort of copy loop or something so that you don't have it duplicated, but we can see we have machine 1 and machine 2 just so it's nice and clear. And then we have our network interfaces. And then we, in the network interfaces, reference our public IPs. And then finally, we have our 2 virtual machines. So we have virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2, and then some extensions that get applied to them. But this may seem like a lot from a Bicep file standpoint. Like I said before, it's really the basic, not basic, but it's the example file from the learn.microsoft.com website on how to deploy virtual machines with Bicep. So it seems like a lot, but I wanted it to be somewhat realistic for this example. But that is what we're deploying right now. So as we can see here, it just finished. So we should be able to refresh our portal. And we can see that we have our deployment. So this is our regular deployments RG, deployed both virtual machines, the disks, the network interfaces, the IPs, everything we need. So we essentially have our application, if it were running on virtual machines, deployed and running. So let's say, production's up, we're making money. But what if we have a lovely admin that came in and got tasked with saving money? Saving money is a popular thing when we do anything in the cloud. It's not unique to Azure, but it is something, that people like to do. They don't want to spend a ton of money on wasted resources. So our lovely admins have decided that virtual machines are expensive. And therefore, the best thing we can do is delete all of the virtual machines, except for, of course, theirs. So we look here, we've got a script that's going to list all of the virtual machines, except for, I didn't mean to do that, except for their virtual machine. So we can see here, we're doing a query filter. We're going to filter out their demo admin VM, but then list everything else. So if we do that command in there down here, we can see that we have our regular deployed 1 and regular deployed 2, which are over here. And let's say as our admin, we say no VMs. I don't want any VMs except for my VM in Azure. So I'm going to have this script here. It's going to loop through those VMs and it's going to simply say delete them. And because this admin has contributor access at the subscription level, there's no issue. It's just running. Like they didn't get a deny. It's, it's not their VM, but they're allowed to delete it. And that's, kind of, scary in some environments. Make sure people that have permissions are the right people to have those permissions. It's kind of the rule there. But we can see that they completely had the permissions. They were allowed to. They're deleting those virtual machines. The issue we can run in here is our admin obviously didn't understand our application environment. So yes, they're deleting our virtual machines, which here in a second, that'll drop off a little slower in the portal. They're deleting both virtual machines, but they're leaving all the disks. They're leaving all the network interfaces. They're leaving the public IP addresses, the VNet, the NSG. So they're saving money, but they're also wasting money because now we have resources out there that are not being even utilized anymore because the virtual machines are gone, but you're still being charged for the resources out here that charge you. So once we refresh, we can see those virtual machines are gone and we've got a bunch of orphaned resources now. But our admin is happy because they completed their task and they've deleted those resources. So how do we improve on this situation? Well, let's say that this application we're deploying is production. So we want it to be, protected. We also want to be able to manage it throughout the life cycle of the application. And, we can clean it up when it's ready to be cleaned up. So what we can do now is look at deployment stacks. So what you'll notice is I'm going to create another resource group. This is just to keep things clean. So I'm going to create another resource group. This one is going to be called Stack Deployment Resource Group. And then we're going to run the AZ stack command. So like we talked about before, notice a couple things that are different from the AZ deployment command. We have our deny settings mode that we have to set. We can say none, but we have to declare it. And here we're going to say basically these are read only. We're denying write and delete. You can also just deny delete, but we're going to deny write and delete, which makes this read only resources. And the other important thing, the cool thing about this is we get all this power, but we're not doing anything to our Bicep file. It's the same exact Bicep file that we just deployed traditionally. We're not modifying it, deploying it exactly the same way, but we do have to name our stack and the other required parameters. So let's go ahead and deploy the stack. And of course, these commands, if you're running these through pipelines and things like that, these commands would be used in a pipeline, just like if you're doing your regular deployments. You basically just have to edit your pipeline to be able to use this if you've got things running in whatever pipeline flavor you have, if it's ADO, if it's GitHub, if it's that one that runs in AWS. Anyways, so we've got this deploying, and it's deploying at the resource group level. So remember when we talked about scopes, that means that the stack is going to live at the resource group level, and then the resources that it's managing are going to live inside of that resource group. So once this gets going, why? So it should be showing my stack deployments group already. Did that didn't fail, did it? No. Interesting. Interesting that it's not showing my stack here. Huh. Well, it should show here in a second. Let's go look at. So this hasn't failed, which means it is deploying, which means the stack deployment resource group does exist. But the portal is being very mean to me right now and is not showing the resource group to where we can go look at the stack, which is what I was planning on doing right now. So let's see if I can get to it that way. Haha. So I've tried this before and I clicked on a recently accessed resource from when I ran this before. So we're in here. Cool. It's still deploying. But what I wanted to show is the deployment stacks under settings is now available in the portal. So what you can see in here is when you click on this, you'll see all the deployment stacks at the scope that you're at. Because we're inside of this resource group, we're seeing this deployment stack, which is deploying because it's being deployed to that resource group, meaning the stack lives at that resource group scope. So we can see things like its status, it's deploying. We can see where it's deployed to. We can see its properties. So this is really cool. Like you can see your detached resources. So like, let's say you said, hey, these resources used to be part of this stack, but I don't want them part of the stack, but I don't necessarily want to delete the resources either. Well, then those are detached resources. So then they'll show up in that list. Then you have your deleted resources. So you do have a audit trail of what's been deleted, which is cool. Your failed resources. So if a resource fails to deploy, it'll show up in that list. And of course, your current resources that you can see in that list. And then your outputs from your deployments. will be in your outputs. So we can also see things like the deny settings. So deny, write, and delete. We did not enable apply to child scopes, which for this one, because it's being deployed to a resource group, isn't super important, except for things like extensions on a virtual machine are technically a child of the virtual machine. So there is that. And let's see if this is done yet. If we look at our deployment, we can see our deployment is complete, which means if we go look at our resources, we can see the other tall tale sign of if somebody is using a deployment stack. Somebody's using a deployment stack and they have deny assignments set, you can go into access control and go to deny assignments, and you'll see that we have our deny assignment here. Now, you can also see that you can only use deny assignments with deployment stacks. So that's really it's one of the prime features of deployment stacks, and it's one of the reasons why I like them so much. But we can see we have a deny assignment there. So moving forward, we're going to put our admin hat back on. Well, I guess first, I showed you the deployment stack in the portal. Now we can also look at the deployment stack, of course, through the AZ CLI. So we can see the AZ stack through the group show. I have it outputting to a table, and I didn't declare any other properties. So it is only showing that our deployment stack basically exists and some very basic information, like it's in a succeeded state and the date that it was last modified by the stack. So that is available. You also have all the information in the CLI that we just looked at through the portal. Just a little, if you're going to automate it, it's of course worth it, but it's a little harder to on the fly just type out all of those. But if we put our admin hat back on, now that we've viewed our deployment stack, we can put our admin hat back on, and we can continue with our goal of saving money by deleting all virtual machines other than mine, because my virtual machine as the admin gets to stay. So we go ahead and list out our virtual machines that exist on the subscription, and we find that there are 2 more that have magically shown up that I do not like being there, and those 2 need to go away. So we're going to use the same script as before, VMs to delete. It's going to list those VMs that are not my VM and try to delete them. But this time, we can't delete them. And we can't delete them because of this lovely deny assignment authorization failed. So what I really like about this error is it's very clear on what's happening. It says the client, and this is my client with object ID, my object ID for this managed identity, has permission to perform delete on scope, but however, the access has been denied because of the deny assignment. So any admin that is out there, or anybody running the AZ CLI that is out there trying to perform an action, they get a very clear message that, hey, you do have permission to do this, but also, no, you can't do it. So what does our administrator that wants to delete all virtual machines except for their own do at this point? Well, they very angrily delete the resource group instead. So like I said before, we deployed our stack to the resource group scope. And because the stack exists at the resource group scope, it cannot enforce the deny assignment on that resource group. So our admin has found a loophole. And our admin is getting a successful deletion, except for this time they're deleting the whole resource group, which in a way is better because it doesn't leave the orphaned resources, but it stinks for us if this is a production application making money and maybe this isn't intentional. Maybe it's an accidental deletion. Okay, so while that is deleting, we can move on to our next one. And I do see, Bala, you asked me to increase the font size. Is it better now, or do I need to increase it again? Probably in the portal, I need to increase it. Looking at the screen. Okay. So that's deleting. So now we can look at the, thank you. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I hope everything was clear enough. Maybe if you maximize or zoom in. But if we look at the deploy virtual machine deployment stacks from the subscription scope, so this time we're going to set our deployment stack at the subscription scope. we're going to have the Bicep deployment create that resource group that we're going to deploy to, and then also deploy the resources within it, meaning that the stack can enforce those deny assignments on that resource group. So let's go back to our resource group view here. And then we're going to review our Bicep file for subscription level. So what I did here is, because we're targeting a subscription, there are some specific things you have to do inside of Bicep. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but essentially you have to tell Bicep that you're intentionally doing a subscription deployment. So that's what this target scope subscription is. And then you also, well, I guess you don't have to do any of the rest of the stuff. I chose to do this. I chose to deploy a resource group at that subscription scope. And then I have a module reference to the other Bicep file. Again, not changing that Bicep file. I'm trying as hard as I can to not change that Bicep file. But I'm just referencing that Bicep file and then passing the parameters through. So this is basically just a wrapper of a Bicep file wrapping another Bicep file, so that we can get this resource group to be in scope for our stack to protect it. So now that we've seen the Bicep, let's go ahead and deploy it. It's deploying to another resource group, so it should not be affected by what our administrator is doing. One of the things to look on the deployment command that we're doing here, we can see that we still have our deny settings mode. We're still keeping it as read-only. We are changing it a little bit to actually do the apply to child scopes. So this just makes sure that any child resources that may be deployed to this stack also get those deny assignments. Then one of the most powerful parts about this is super exciting, and this is one of the really cool things about deployment stacks, is you can actually specify RBAC actions that are still allowed to be done. So for example, we're saying these resources are read-only. You can't do anything to them, except for you can do whatever you want with the tags on the resources. So you can delete, you can update, you can add tags, but you can't do anything else. So that's really cool. If you've made RBAC assignments, like custom RBAC roles, then you're familiar with the format of how to specify these. But of course, you can always look it up on Microsoft documentation. But we're going to go ahead and just run our sub create, because it's creating that resource group. We don't need to create it first. And it's going to run, and it will allow for tag updates, but nothing else. So while that's deleting or adding, we'll check in on our deletion, and we can see that our administrator is now in a great mood, because they've again won and deleted our resource group, which means they've deleted the virtual machines. So let's just wait a moment for that subscription resource group, or I'll do the same trick I did before and go look at the resource group this way. So we can see the stack deployment sub, it's a different resource group name. If we go look at deployment stacks though, it's empty. Now, would I expect there to be a deployment stack here because this resource group was deployed using a deployment stack? I mean, it kind of makes sense, but you got to remember we're looking at the resource group scope here, and we just deployed to the subscription scope. So to view this deployment stack, we actually have to go back out, go to our subscription, and then go to deployment stacks, which is right here. And we can see that our deployment stack is here and is deploying, which is wonderful and awesome. And we are able to see the same parameters and things that we were able to see before, like our deployment information. We're able to see the properties, which include all of the fun detached resources. Also, if you ever have to reach out to support, if you ever have to contact me directly, these correlation IDs, great. They help us immensely. So the fact that it's just here in plain text for you to be able to even copy out is great, because that helps us with looking up logs in the backend. But anytime you're interacting with Azure, that correlation ID, it should be included in every header response to API requests. Just kind of a side note, keep an eye out for those if you ever have to interact with us in support. But we have our deployment stack. It is deploying. We saw that we have our properties, all of that fun stuff. You can edit and redeploy from the portal. Also, once it's done and it's in a good state, you can delete from the portal. We're not going to do that. We're going to delete from the CLI, but fun times. Let's go back to our resource groups and we can see our stack deployment is about done. We have all of our disks for our virtual machines. Our virtual machines are there, so we can jump back into administrator mode. All right, putting our administrator hat back on. Remember, we want to save all the money by deleting every virtual machine except for mine, because I am the administrator. I get my virtual machine and all that fun stuff. So let's list out our current virtual machines that exist out there. We can see that we have our deployment sub 1 and 2. So these ones are just named prod stack deployment, but they're inside of the subscription level resource group name. So we can see here that these are deployed just like before. I forgot I wanted to talk about this, so sorry. I'm putting my deployment hat back on, just to be clear. If we look at IAM, we can see that just like before, we have our deny assignment here, and our deny assignment does exist. But what we didn't have before is at the resource group level, if we go to IAM and go to deny assignment, that didn't exist before. When we deployed to the resource group scope, it didn't have this, but it does now because the stack is deployed to the subscription and it is now managing that resource group as part of this application deployment. Okay, back to being an administrator that wants to delete all the things. We can go in and try to delete these virtual machines. We will expect the same error we got last time, which, oh my gosh, I'm such an upset administrator at the moment because I got this deny assignment authorization failed, where it confirms that I have the right permissions, but it tells me no anyways. So we continue with our anger deletion of the entire resource group because it worked last time. So why not do it again? So this time we try to delete the resource group and we get the same error. Deny assignment authorization failed. That's because we have this deny assignment on the resource group, and the resource group is being managed as part of the stack. So now that I am a very upset administrator, I am going to simply add some tags to those virtual machines by running the az tag create command. So let's copy these out. And I'm going to add some tags, which we can go back to our resource group and into our virtual machine. And we can see in the tag section that we now have a lovely tag named admin note, and that admin asking why they can't delete it. Because they're able to update tags and they're able to delete tags. Like the admin could delete this tag if they wanted to, because we gave them the permission in our deployment command. We said, you can do whatever you want with tags, but you can't do anything else. So it's a really powerful, really awesome way to have, your entire stack of resources contained and, more importantly, managed by the stack. Okay, so our admin is truly upset, but that's okay because our production application is running. It hasn't been deleted, and the company can make money because we have our applications up. So if we jump back over to our deployment, we're going to real quick run through. Let's say it is now the end of the life cycle for our lovely deployment stack that deployed our virtual machines and whatever other resources that the stack is managing at this point. Well, we can take a quick look, make sure the stack is there and still in a good state, which it is. It's showing it succeeded. So now we can, through the stack, go ahead and say, hey, it's end of life cycle. Let's clean up these resources. So we're going to use the az stack sub delete command, which, like we were talking about before, when you are deleting, it does have the option to just disassociate. So basically says, I'm not managing this resource anymore. It's just a normal resource in ARM in Azure. Or we can set the delete all, which will actually remove those resources from Azure, which is what we're going to do here. The -- yes just makes it to where it doesn't ask us if we're sure, because we're sure. So we went ahead and submitted our deletion of our stack. That's going to run. It's going to clean up all of those resources associated with the stack, including the resource group, because it's being managed by the stack. And that will essentially go away. So that's how we manage the entire life cycle of our fake application that's running on 2 separate virtual machines we can deploy it with a stack without having to modify our Bicep files, but we then get all of this added management capabilities that we didn't have before. And if you as a developer have ever deployed anything like a Databricks cluster or AKS, there's some similarities there with the managed resource groups that those deploy in your environment. So for example, if you deploy an AKS cluster, you notice that it deploys a managed resource group that houses those containers or the compute that you run your containers on. And that compute is managed by the service. Well, in this case, it's pretty similar to where AKS, you can't go in and mess with those that compute hardware directly. You have to do it through the service. Well, here, if you set it up with the proper deny commands, you essentially have your own private managed resource group or private set of resources that you can say nobody else can manage, but me as the service and or me as the stack, I can manage these resources, and they are more protected in that fashion. So that is essentially it for deployment stacks. It is not a crazy leap if you're already used to using Bicep or ARM templates or anything, but it is a really cool new technology that I am definitely excited about inside of Azure. So with that, we can go to our last slide. And on this slide, you can see my contact information if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you send me an invite request, just please mention that you came from the .NET Pittsburgh user group. Otherwise, I may ignore it. Not to be rude, but I don't like getting added by bots. So if you do want to reach out, I'd be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. Just please mention where you came from so that we can say hi and be friends. I also have my GitHub here. If you do go out to my GitHub, which I have right here, you can see that I have the slides repo here. And this slides repo has our deployment stacks talk from today. It'll have a PDF export of all of the slides that we went over. It also has a complete workthrough of what we worked through today in the demo. It also has sources, so direct links to all of the documentation that I used to create this talk. And then if you're interested in the Bicep files, they're also in here too. So feel free to jump over to GitHub and take a look if you want to reproduce anything that we went over today. But at this point, I think we are good to open it up for questions. And Vala, you can take back over.
Thank you, Josh. And I'll open up for questions, and I don't see anything in the comments at the moment. Feel free to ask questions. Even if not now, you could reach out to LinkedIn and ask questions to Josh. He's pretty responsive.
I try to be.
Okay, I don't see anything. So thank you everyone for joining us, and Joshua, thank you very much for taking time and walking us through this new stack, which is really helpful. Thanks everyone. See you next month with another topic.
Thanks everybody.